No, that's fine. I wrote it down. I've got the thing. But we are now recording, and just to do my typical welcome to this Data Champions online discussion. We are going to be talking with Andy Ridgewell about grant-making analysis in Somerset Community Foundation. And also, just so I don't miss it, Andy, aside from what you were about to talk us through, do you have any data challenges and priorities that you're currently working on other than what you're about to show us?
Well, it's similar sort of themes, really. We've just done I just did the data upload to 360 Giving for our 2018-19 data, and it spat out the insights in double quick time, which was good to see. And I just shared that around and highlighted some of the issues we talked about before with that data. But it was really interesting because, again, the average age of our organisations are much older than we thought they were going to be, which was really interesting to see. And may well be a theme across all community foundations. I don't know. We're going forward with those uploads, going to be doing them quarterly now, which will tie in with the board reporting that I'm doing on our grants, with the grants reporting that I'm doing to our board of trustees. So I'd like to be bringing in more insights into what I'm telling them. But again, it does sort of come back to that point about, well, what is it they actually want from it, and I'm still sort of exploring how to pose those questions to actually get the sort of information back that we want. I think we're capturing data a bit better, but actually using it in terms of driving strategy is still a work in progress there for us.
That is really interesting. I just for the sake of me just asking a stupid question, but in terms of the 360 insights, like what does it do for you guys when you upload that data and then you see it back? I mean, Steve's been good in terms of like, you know, what that's meant for him, but I'm just wondering for you, like how does it provide you with more value?
Well, the value is in the fact that it's doing it for me, because I used to generate those sorts of numbers, and I still will. And I think probably with the exception of the age of organisations, which is not something we've ever looked at before, I think all of the other things were numbers that we were generating. It's doing it for us, and it makes it look nice and sort of coherent. And so it's one less thing for us to do. But I don't, with that one exception, I don't think it's adding anything new as such.
Yeah.
Yeah, just from my point of view, I think it comes down to, again, to what we were talking about this morning, of somebody external to community foundations, just looking at your information and maybe just presenting it in a subtly different way. We haven't done haven't analysed our data in that specific way. And it just makes you think, oh yeah, there's a new question there, let's go away. I had to then go away and do the similar thing to look at all the non-registered organisations, because I thought, oh, that's fine. The fact that we're risk averse is because we fund non-registered charities or non-registered organisations, and that'll prove me wrong. But actually, it still backed up the data. So they have raised a very specific challenge just by showing me one very simple bar chart to answer a question that we hadn't asked. It's made me think of it in another way. So it's just somebody else looking at your data and going, well, what about that you haven't thought of?
Yeah. Good. Cool. So I think with that, Andy, do you want to take us through GIS and grant making analysis and what's going on, your journey at Somerset Foundation?
Sure. Okay. Don't think it's going to be anything groundbreaking, but what I'm going to do is go through 5 maps that I've created, which we've used in different contexts, and then just a couple of thoughts about some of the issues that we've been having, and where we're looking to go to from here. So I'm just going to try and share my screen a minute, and let's bring that up. And from there, so can you see that now? It says QGIS.
Yeah.
Excellent. So So just to start with, we're using two bits of software to generate maps. One is called QGIS, which is an open source, i.e. free bit of software, hugely customizable, if that's a word, but not particularly user-friendly. There's quite a learning curve with it, I find. And you can use that to produce static maps that are suitable for print publications and that kind of thing. And then on the right-hand side, we're using Carto, which is, there's a free version of it, but I've noticed increasingly they are trying to push people towards the paid version. But I've been able to use everything I've needed to in the free version. Again, you can do lots with it. It's more user-friendly, and you can create dynamic content for websites and so on from there. So that's the kind of two things I've been using. As well as that, I do use Google Maps sometimes, and there's an example of that at the end, which I can just mention quickly. It's worth obviously pointing out you can generate spatial data like this from Power BI, and there's other things that plug into Salesforce, so there's various options out there. So the first map I just want to share with you, hopefully you can get an idea of that. This is a map that was produced for the Crime Beat Trust, which is our High Sheriff's charity. So what I did with them, when we started working with them a couple of years ago, I mapped street level crime data in our county over the course of a year. So the police make their crime data open and available now. So it's something like 20,000 crimes or something in the county. I was able to get them in, this is in QGIS, turned it into a heat map. And then on top of that, I was just mapping grants they'd previously made against applications they'd had in. And I think prior to working with us, they were really quite a reactive funder. They were funding, goalposts and all sorts of things, all perfectly fine. But there was no real strategy behind what they were doing. And I think what this just showed them at a very early stage is there are some insights out there that they can start to target their giving in a slightly more strategic way. And I think it helped to start a conversation producing this map, and that conversation has taken about 2 years, but they now have we were talking about ambition before, and they've gone from an organisation that was raising £20,000 a year, and in the last year they managed to raise 150,000, and they're funding a very targeted mentoring program. And I think this sort of insight just helped to push them in that direction a little bit more.
Can I just ask, is it because that, like, I see some heat maps where there isn't any grants being made, and is that that's the sort of thing that
on a very basic level, it just showed them that you can look at this sort of crime data that's out there, and you can tie in your given. That's the aim of the High Sheriff's Fund, is there around crime prevention and that sort of stuff. So it was just highlighting to them that there's huge hotspots where they weren't really doing anything, and maybe they need to think about that.
Cool. And so this is to inform them in terms of their grant making, right?
Exactly, yeah. So they just started to work with us in terms of us administering their fund on their behalf. And it was really just so that they could tighten up their criteria. I just wanted them to start thinking about why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
It was a sort of strange organisation, to be honest, and I think this just helped to take them on a journey at that point.
Cool.
Just jumping forward, I can show you the live versions of these, but I mean, this is again a map of our county. This is our grants from 2 years ago. I haven't done one from last year. So just underlaid with the indices of deprivation, then our grants on the top, darker colours, bigger grants, and so on. This was something I produced for our board at the time, who are asking to sort of get an idea of where our money's going. And I think, like a lot of community foundations, there's an interest to see money spread across the county. So I think at that point, what they got from this was just a feeling for where our money's going and where some of the hot and cold spots are. It doesn't necessarily answer all the questions, as some parts of our county have very, very low populations. So it's not quite as simple as that. But what it does, just very visually, and I know from talking to my colleagues, sometimes visuals are the best way to get information across to the board. It's just easier to digest. So I think it's just a quick reference point to get an idea of where the money was going during that year. Now, what we haven't started to do with this sort of information with our board is actually look to proactively work in areas where we don't necessarily, where we haven't necessarily given a lot of money. So there's obvious hotspots on that map around our towns, but there's rural areas where we've not been giving anything. And I think what it did was it started to highlight that we needed to reach out more into those areas. But we've not necessarily been particularly proactive about it, I would say. But it did just highlight that issue. That's a live map. You can sort of click on it and get grants data when you click on the dots and so on. Just another example, this is one I'm doing with a solar fund, which I'm at the meetings in a couple of weeks. So they're funding, because it's around the solar farm, it's restricted to a number of parishes, which I was able to map, put the solar farm on there, and then the location of their grants. So very quickly we can see whether they're all eligible or not, which is always helpful. And then this will be the first time I will have met with them, but I suspect the sort of geography from how far away they are from the farm might come into their decisions. So again, it's just a tool to sort of aid that decision-making process with panels. Excuse me. And it's just there to complement the other information that we provide. This is one that we did for our Surviving Winter campaign. So this is the annual campaign where we ask people to donate their winter fuel payment, and it then goes back out to older folk who need a bit of extra help in the winter. So I've mapped fuel poverty in the background, which are the blue colours. But what was actually interesting on this, the yellow dots are our donors and the red dots are the recipients. So these are individuals rather than groups in this instance. And what we actually saw for the first time when we did this is there's a lot more donors in the east of our county and a lot more recipients in the west of our county. That was never the intention of the programme, and we don't quite know how we've got to that point. But we looked at it and it sort of felt like we're facilitating a wealth transfer from one part of our county to the other. Not necessarily a terrible thing, but that wasn't actually the messaging we were giving out. So that has actually, this was from the year before last, not the year just gone. And that actually has helped us to look at, one, making sure we're getting the messaging out to potential grant recipients in those areas where we weren't getting any, but equally targeting our donor development work in those cold spot areas that we could see on this map. So that was actually quite an interesting exercise, and we learned something that I don't think we would have got from just the data in a spreadsheet or whatever. So that was quite handy for us. And just finally, Google Maps, which we also use sometimes. So it's just different tools to do different things. And that was really what I wanted to share in terms of the sorts of things that I'm going to stop that sharing a minute. So very briefly, those are just some of the sorts of examples that we're doing, and some of the ways we're doing it. I think the issue for us is it's starting to help our grants panels, and I think it's starting to help them think in slightly different ways. I don't think it's sort of gone up from there in terms of influencing our philanthropic development practices or the direction that the Community Foundation is going. I don't think we're really using them for that yet. But in terms of actually helping our grants panels make decisions, I think that's been the biggest gain for us. I think the most interesting insight did come from our work with Surviving Winter, and just seeing actually that we've got donors coming from here and recipients coming from over here, which was really quite surprising to us to see that. So that's kind of the extent of what we're doing with GIS and maps at the moment. In terms of sort of some of the challenges or the issues we find with using it, generally what I found is that somebody has already done what I've wanted to do somewhere else. So you can usually find examples of what you need elsewhere, and I included some links in the document, as you might have seen, just to where you can get sources of data and the IMD data and boundary data and all of that sort of stuff. And there's quick and easy ways of kind of converting postcodes to spatial information that you can stick on a map and all that kind of stuff. So it's all things I think you can sort of learn yourself just with a bit of Googling, which you can most things these days. And as I said, I think it's increasingly become quite a useful tool for us. And what I'd like to do going forward is bring in some more of the 360 giving data, just to get a real idea of our county and where the money's going, bringing in the data from the lottery and Lloyds and Children in Need and whoever. And again, I've included an example in the document I pasted in from, actually, it was hosted on the 360 Giving website, but it was a group called Bath Hacked. So they covered, they did an exercise in Bath and North East Somerset where they mapped all of the grants data for that area, I think over a year or 3 years, from all the different funders. And they ended up with a really quite interesting resource just to show, there were some real hotspots in that area and equally some really cold spots which didn't look like they were getting any money at all, interestingly. So I'm really keen sort of to start doing that with the grants data we have more generally. And I'm hoping then that can become a tool for our philanthropy development director to start sort of using that to generate some more donors, for our grants panels to just think a bit more strategically about some of the giving that we're doing. So I think there's quite a lot we can do with it. As I mentioned, we're going to be sort of doing this more quarterly, so it may be that part of our quarterly grants data exercise will be to generate some more of these maps just to see where our funding is going. But I suppose ultimately it's just finding a way to sort of how we dovetail that into our existing governance arrangements, and how the question I still haven't quite worked out for myself is and this came up earlier, is what sorts of questions are we trying to answer, and where might the answers take us? So a useful tool for us, doesn't answer all the questions. There's lots of caveats to it, but I think certainly putting information in a spatial format, I think for a lot of people helps them to digest the information. I think it can just look at the information in a different way, and I think it can help us reach slightly different decisions in our grant making. So certainly a useful thing to do, and not particularly time consuming once you've got up to speed with doing it. And that's pretty much all I've got to say.
That's great. I'm going to let Steve ask some questions first, if you've got any, Steve.
I don't have questions as such. I think what struck me about that is how blindingly obvious everything looks when you've done it in a picture. And that, I think, that's probably what the 360 Insights thing did. It wasn't revolutionary stuff. It was just a picture. And as soon as you look at that, you go, oh yeah. And then, so you can see that there, as you said, there's that wealth transfer from one side of the map to the other. And so then you can think, well, what analysis do I need to do in that cold spot area to figure out how am I going to motivate those donors? So actually just putting it into a visual environment starts to ask questions that you never would have got if you looked at a list on a spreadsheet. So I think maybe that is just one thing to take away, is just try visualizing some what you think is really obvious stuff and then going, well, I didn't think it would tell me that. So that's definitely my takeaway from that, is to, I mean, I have heard of Cartel, I haven't used it, and I certainly haven't heard of QGIS. So I think there's definitely something to be shared wider here or in some other kind of forum to build something where we, as part of the data repository, where people can, you've done the hard work already, but start to use this to actually come up with a tool where, much like 360 Insights, where you could just change the filters on the side and say, give me the crime data, give me the donors and whatever, and just change the spots, would be massive. I mean, I think that's something that we as a foundation probably need to work on, or share a facility. I do know, I think it's Sussex have got, she said to me, I can't remember who it is. It's one of the big energy suppliers is going to be doing some work with her, Hannah, to try and build a data model. So maybe this is we try and get her to view the recording to say, can they do something around this where it's a more flexible model where we can visualize our data. They were talking about using Tableau, which I had a quick look at yesterday. But
yeah, that's sort of a similar. I mean, there's so many of these things out there. I mean, it's always most of them. That's another one where there's a sort of free version and then there's a paid for.
Yeah, it's
version.
quite pricey. I looked at.
It is quite pricey. I mean, the open source stuff is good, but it's just never as user friendly, and it's just more of a learning curve with it. But I'm sort of more comfortable with it because it's not really going to go anywhere, and they're not just going to change their pricing or something all of a sudden. But that's always, it's always going to be there.
No, but I think it's that's my takeaway, is looking at the same data that you may have always been looking at, but looking at it visually can suddenly make you ask questions that you hadn't thought of.
Well, and the one thing I always appreciate about maps is it does make information about, it's much more about communities. It's much more about, it's funny, you get it on a map and it's suddenly much more about, collective, right? Rather than individuals, because it's showing a communal space.
Yeah, even I was looking at the map going, oh, I've been on holiday just near there.
So yeah, I know, I was doing that too.
Yeah, you feel more connected to it. Yeah.
Yeah,
it might just be helpful if I share the one from Bath Hacked, if you want to have a look at that.
Oh, yeah, please.
Just share the screen a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, I can geek out on maps. I love maps.
Can you see that green splodge?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Wow. So this is the one from Bath Hack. So this is Quartet's area. This is not us, I should say. And this was a group that, as I said, I think it was something done under 360 Giving, but they've aggregated the total grants by ward and then shaded the background colours accordingly. So this ward here, which is Bath Haven, which is a very dark blue, has had a hell of a lot of money, whereas Clutton, I don't know these areas very well, doesn't appear to have anything very much at all. And then down the side, you can see the different funders that they've got, and you can actually select those and just limit them to the different funders that you want to look at. So I think as a sort of live, and then of course you can tick, if I just bring back the lottery. So obviously the lottery is by far the biggest, as we would expect, but you can sort of click on the dots and tell you what it is and all of that sort of stuff. So as a kind of live tool that lives, you can embed this in your website and all of that sort of stuff. I think it is potentially quite a powerful insight into what's been going on into that particular area.
No, I like that a lot. I want one.
You want one?
Yeah.
Well, I wonder too. Like, so I actually just wanted to ask you, Andy, in terms of like, learning about how to use these things. I'm noted, you can see the different usability things with the different packages and all that's out there. But how much of a background have you had in sort of doing GIS stuff?
None at all.
So you've learned completely on the job.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of nominally attached to something when I was working overseas where they were mapping forests, but I wasn't involved in that side of things. But no, I mean, I did find I find there's enough out there to work out how to do these things and to find the answers to things. I'm probably bodging some of it, to be honest with you, but I seem to be able to get to where I need to go. And some of the resources that I link to, that you can get the data sets and you can attach them fairly easily. And there just seems to be enough. There's enough people out there doing this stuff, it seems, and enough sort of guides and whatnot that you can just work it out.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I just, when you're going into a board meeting and they've suddenly come up with a question where you then are thinking, oh, I've got to put that on a map. Is there, like, are you usually walking away going, oh, that's going to be easy? Or are you often walking away going, oh, I don't know how I'm going to figure out how to do this, but I'll take it.
Well, again, because I think, as Steve said earlier, because the questions that were being asked are fairly routine questions, it's not that difficult. It would be better if we were being asked more kind of, I don't know if the word insightful is the right term, but just more probing questions. I think it would become more difficult, and I might not be able to do it. I probably wouldn't be able to do it, but we're not actually, I don't think we're asking the right questions of the information we have or don't have at the moment. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, do you mind if I ask you for an example of that? Like, what do you think questions you should be asking?
Well, that's the issue. Is I don't know if I know the questions either. That's the thing.
It's the what do you don't know stuff.
It's what we don't know, and I know we've come around to that before, to be honest with you. And it's that maybe that is that blue sky thinking that maybe I'm missing at the moment, and maybe that's where we need people need to get together and maybe think about these things in the round, which we're probably not doing at the moment. I think for people, for most of the grants teams, sort of like myself, we're dealing with it every day, and I think it'd be quite difficult to kind of probe into it too much, and you almost need to step away from it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It is very difficult when you're doing it every day, but some of the examples that were coming out, would we get more small grant applications from newer, younger organisations if our application form was easier? So is our website an obstacle? Do you have to click too many times to get to the application form? And do we ask too many questions to give someone £1,000?
Yeah.
And it's quite difficult to test that, but we are starting a community listening exercise. So we are actually going to go out and ask those questions physically, so that the data that will come back from that will be a lot different. But at least by looking at the data and going, do you know what we're not seeing the new young organisations. How do we get them? What do we think are the obstacles? And then let's go and try and find out if we can actually establish what the obstacles are, and then take the obstacles out of the way. So if nothing else, if it just starts you down that path, and you may have to come up with completely different ways to get to the next question, because you're actually going to have to ask somebody what the problem is. Just starts you on a journey. I think that's good, and the journey can always be long, or it can be short sometimes.
Yeah, and it is I think that bit in terms of what information are you getting from people, and then how are you able to use it? So are you able to collect data about I mean things like that, like how difficult is it for somebody who has a real need for £1,000 grant? How difficult is it for them to get it, and being able to I mean, it's that thing of like, obviously if people are asking for that kind of money, probably time is really precious, right? And so even the feedback and interaction can be another layer of stuff.
Yeah. Right? So should we, for a smaller application, should it be a recorded video, just of them speaking to some of their beneficiaries or something, and people in a room and saying, why do we need this £1,000? Pass the phone round, you get that's your application. And then what you're monitoring 6 months later, it's another video of them showing what they achieved with that £1,000. We've really got to move from this very paper kind of orientated, form filling, box ticking thing, and find other ways of capturing what we need. Just because people want boxes, ticks, and values and data can be a lot of different things. It can just be a picture of a lot of smiling faces, and job done.
That's another really good point of like, what is data, right? And where are we getting it from, where we're getting out of it. And I think the thing too, like Andy, with you, it's like the map is one way of looking at the data, right? But it's another form of controlling and keeping the data, right? So then what are other ways that people can be interacting with the data? I have to say, I now, if you do that thing, Steve, where you're doing the application with people passing the phone around, I want to make an application. Like, that just sounds like so much fun, right?
Our trustees would lay an egg. Let's put it that way.
But I mean, I think, Andy, like, is there, like for you in terms, so mapping is one way, and then, there's the spreadsheet. Are there other visuals? Are there other tools that you're finding that might be new and unusual in terms of being able to get data and being able to understand it more meaningfully?
Not really. I mean, I think that the whole thing of data visualization is very handy, and I think what we talked about very comes into it. I don't think there's any tools as such which we're using at the moment that I'm just trying to think. No, I can't think of anything at the moment. No.
Yeah, because what I'd be really curious for in terms of your journey is like, when do you guys get to a point where you realize the map, you need something more than a map or something other than a map to get the information, and then what is that, right? That you need to look at it from.
Yeah. I think we're quite sort of, I think that's quite new what we've done so far, to be honest with you. I don't think anyone's ever really looked at our data before, quite frankly. You know, it gets turned into a table and goes into our annual report at the end of each year, but, you know, there's no lessons learned from that data before I started doing this. So I think it's, for us, it's definitely a useful step in the right direction, but it certainly doesn't get us to where we need to be. As I've said, I'm not entirely sure where that is at the moment. But I think it's definitely beginning to draw some insights about from what we're doing. Before there was sort of assumptions about what we're doing, or there's an assumption we give quite a lot of money here, and you know, in many cases those assumptions are right. In fairness, you know, I think we've got a pretty good feel for what we've been doing. But I do just think it sort of adds some rigor to that and some evidence behind what we're doing. Which is always important when we're dealing with the funds that we're dealing with.
For me, I would say I would come back to the thing that it is a journey of discovery to some extent, discovering what you do know and what you definitely don't know, and you will get to a point where the map has shown you everything it can possibly show you, and then you'll go, this next question either needs a face-to-face discussion to get to the answer of it, or it needs a completely different visual tool, or I don't know. I don't know what it is, because you don't know where you are on that journey yet. So,
no, I mean, coming back to, you know, as you were discussing about sort of the small grants and the complexity of forms and all that sort of stuff, which we know is an issue, and we know, we capture survey. We do a survey every year, so we capture some basic data from that. And the most useful data, though, is the comments. You know, I always put a comments box at the end. So we ask people to score stuff on a 5-point scale and all that, but actually it's the comments at the end, which you kind of get some real insights from, to be honest, when it comes to that sort of stuff. And, you know, it's walking a mile in your applicant's shoes and that kind of thing, isn't it? And, but you ultimately have to talk to people.
Eventually.
And I think that's and the thing too, like, you know, just going out and talking to people and getting to understand them and their experiences and all that is just the sort of key, and that's the data, right?
I think the danger with all of this, though, is you end up just producing pretty pictures. You know, you've always got to remember that there has to be a reason for doing this, and I think that is in the back of my mind, because all of these things take time, and I think we just have to. It's easy to go down that rabbit hole of, you know, there's 101 apps and things we can be using to make things look shiny, but ultimately, if they're not telling us anything and they're not useful in any way, then we need to just forget them. And I think there is a risk with these sort of things that you end up going down that rabbit hole sometimes.
Well, that's interesting, because I think like in a lot of the data work, the other data work that I'm doing, and you know, with you guys in community foundations, for me, you guys are a bit different. I'm usually working with like advocacy groups and campaigning organizations and things like that, and it's interesting with them. And that's the bit where I've been trying to figure out, like, is there commonality? With them, they have a very specific goal, right? And there's often something that they are, you know, trying to accomplish. So the goal becomes that defining piece, right? In terms of, you know, what's the boundaries in terms of what we need, in terms of information and what we need to do. Right. And this thing where, you know, that's come up a couple of times in terms of the blue sky and what are the questions, like for the community foundations, what is the ultimate goal, right, of the community foundations, right? And the thing I've been sort of getting is that, you know, the community foundations, there's a little bit of like wealth transfer, but mostly, about understanding deprivation, understanding poverty, and using the sort of donors and stuff like that to be able to address it. So I wonder if there's in the advocacy world, everybody right now is really fond of this theory of change thing that you then sort of lay everything under, right? And it starts to answer your questions in terms of the boundaries towards what you need and then what you need to do, and it all gets driven towards that. And I wonder with community foundations, is there like a big picture way or a big goal way to get people's mind focused so that you can start having a better sense of the questions, right? So what are the questions that are going to get us to this place that we want to be that we currently are not?
Right. Go on.
No, that's it.
Oh, okay. We use the theory of change here, and the impact of our funding is about creating a thriving voluntary community sector, who in turn then have an impact on their beneficiaries, their communities, and so on. Our mission is described in terms of creating a simpler and more effective way to make a difference. So it's directed at our donors, not our grantees, interestingly. So I think in terms of the tools that we can use, it should ultimately be around supporting and encouraging our donors to give and give more ultimately. And I think the data we have is potentially quite valuable. In the sense that we have the insights, hopefully, we're in the best place to offer them those insights, which others don't have. What I would like to see is our data used more in terms of our philanthropy, which it hasn't been in the past, but it will be in the future. So I think that's our direction of travel with a lot of it.
But so when you're saying philanthropy, you're meaning engaging the donors, right? Data used by your donors.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to be providing the knowledge and insights which they don't have. That's why they're paying us. Ultimately, if you want to come down to brass tacks, they can give themselves, give all their money to the World Wildlife Fund if they wanted to, and they wouldn't need to. But we're working with our donors to give to those groups that are under the radar, that are really meeting local needs in their communities, which you wouldn't be able to find unless you have the sort of insights that we have. So I think our data journey, as with most community foundations, will go in two directions. One is pointed in terms of the donors, and that's probably the larger of the two. But then secondly, sort of in the direction of our grantees as well. So it's probably different, like you say, from a delivery organisation point of view. I don't know if I'm explaining that well.
Well, no, actually, I mean, it's the bit in terms of the you also have to engage your donors in your vision, right? But in a lot of ways, you have to share it, right? So the donors have to contribute to your vision as well, so that they, and that you're having that better sense with the donors of what's their motivations for giving, giving the money locally and all that, and trying to match that. But then also you're trying to shape those motivations as well to make sure that they can and actually are serving a need and getting to where you want to be, which is. The thing that I'm really respectful for in terms of the community foundations is the amount of donors that you all are engaging at this level, right? And also the amount of grantees, like it's just sort of mind-boggling to me. But that you're making that match, and you're trying to communicate all these different things to a whole bunch of different people with a whole bunch of different priorities and perspectives.
We talked about risk before, and I think it's the sorts of lessons that can come out of the data can be that we are quite risk averse, and most of our donors are still alive, so it's their money. We have to talk to them, and they can be quite risk averse. But it's this sort of information that might just help to sort of push that back a little bit. I suspect it will, it will be incremental, but it could be these sorts of insights that help us to move people in that direction.
Yeah, the information helps them to make it feel less risky, right?
Or accept that you need to make risks for rewards, isn't it? So if you want to achieve that difference, you're going to have to take some risks.
Oh, that's really interesting. Cool. Steve, anything to add?
No, I was only going to say, I think the difference between us and a delivery organisation is, I've heard this said somewhere before, that most charities actually exist to close. They want to establish what the issue is, tackle the issue, get rid of it, shut themselves down. Community foundations don't exist to shut themselves down. They exist in permanence. And this data is helping us evolve. We've done one thing for 10, 20 years, some of us, but now we realize we have to evolve to continue to deliver on that mission. So I think you're right, Randy. We have to start saying, you need to start taking risks in order to do this. This issue is upcoming, and you are not going to deal with it with the existing solutions or the solutions of the past 20 years. Take a risk. And if we can wrap enough evidence and confidence around that because of the fact that we've been here a long time as organizations, we can start to take people on that journey. So I'm happy with that.
Well, and let me just add, because I think in terms of the permanence, right, the communities are constantly evolving and changing and shifting, right? Like you have to, it's not just understanding what the community is like right now, right? It's the understanding how the community is changing.
Yeah.
Right. And in a lot of ways, it's really hard to predict. So you gotta, where it's going to change, how things are going to shift within it. So you've got to be able to sort of keep your finger on that evolution, right? Yeah. You guys have to evolve and change with your communities, and you also have to evolve your own understandings.
Yeah, we're working on a dormant trust transfer program that comes through from UKCF, and what I really don't want to happen is that in 20, 50 years time we are dormant trusts that some other new organization is trying to take over. So we need to speed up an awful lot and use this kind of insight to help us to evolve more quickly. I think that's an important thing for us. We've been doing the same thing for 15 odd years, getting bigger and better at it, but now things are moving very, very quickly, and we need to really accelerate.
Yeah, things are moving really quickly. Great. Anything to add, Andy, before I wrap us up?
I think that's about it from me. It feels like Friday afternoon, I have to say at this point.
Guess what? It's Friday afternoon.
I'm just impressed you were sipping water. I'm assuming that was water.
I tell you why, it's because I'm upstairs in our office and there's big windows and they've been closed all day and it's about 400 degrees up here.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Well, Andy, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's good.
For being the spark of that. That was a super helpful discussion. And Steve, thank you so much for showing up today. That I've actually, it's been great for me. I've just learned a hell of a lot. So I'm super appreciative. Like I said, I'll be making this recording available to everyone via the discourse. So hopefully others will be able to watch and get something out of this. Yeah. I will spare both of you the what's next for the Data Champions, because I told Steve this morning, and Andy, you and I will be talking on Monday, the 3rd, about it more deeply. So with that, I can let you go. You can get some relief. And have great bank holiday weekends, both of you.
You too.
Yeah, you too, Doug. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.